Wow, beautiful. You just heard Jane Lenoir and Carla Wilson. Thank you so much. This was beautiful. And I think, Jane, you mentioned this is Pixinguinha, correct?
Pixinguinha, right. A choro called Displicanti.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Jane grew up in a family of professional musicians. She has performed with symphony orchestras, new music ensembles, as well as jazz, Latin, and Brazilian groups. Jane is the founder of Berkeley Choro Ensemble and co-director of the Berkeley Festival of Choro. And Jane, you have a concert coming up, correct?
Yes, we have a concert August 16th at 4 p.m., which is going to be streamed. And I think that you have the information about that. Maybe you could share it with the attendees. But the Berkeley Choro Ensemble is a quartet, flute, clarinet, good 7-string guitar, and pandero percussion. And we are performing primarily music by living Brazilian composers. Many of them you may know, quite well known. As well, the group got 2 grants just recently, 2 weeks ago, from the city of Berkeley to support our festival and our concerts. And we'll be having a women's festival, a festival of women in Brazilian music. 1 concert streamed from Sao Paulo, with 3 amazing, incredible musicians from Brazil. And here as well, we'll have 4 women performing with our ensemble. And that will be streamed probably after 2021. We had to reorganize our entire music because of COVID-19 and having to play online and not being able to rehearse together. So anyway,
Well, count on our support to help spread the word. We included the information in our in our newsletter this week. We'll be sending again to all our distribution list, and I wish you much success. Thank you for joining us.
thank you.
And
And
thank
I'd
you
like,
for everything you do to make the choro music more popular and more accessible to all.
it's getting more and more popular, but also we'd love to have sponsors. So she has my contact information. We're building our audience for the festival and for the concert. So thank you very much, Margarise.
Thank you. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Jane, and much success.
Okay, thank you.
And welcome to BayBrazil Annual Conference. This edition is a very special to us because last June marked our 10th anniversary. To celebrate this occasion, we are expanding our annual conference into a 3-month program of weekly events. We've been discussing several topics, and today we are joined by a group of experts in cloud computing who will be giving us the path of innovation in cloud in this past decade and forward. So before I invite our speakers, I want to share a little bit about what BayBrazil has been doing in this 10 years that we are operating. I'm going to be sharing my screen here with you. And just to give you a sense of what is our community and what we've been doing in this past 10 years. So I founded BayBrazil in 2010. At that time, there was a lot of buzz about BRICS. Specialists predicted that Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa were poised to be the world's dominant economies by year 2050. With a rising middle class, Brazil was considered the BRICS darling. However, no one was talking about Brazil in Silicon Valley at that time. At the meantime, Brazil's entrepreneurial community was starting to flourish. So I founded BayBrazil in 2010 to build the community and connect to Brazil. One of the instruments we use to bring the community together is events. In 2010, not only was no one talking about Brazil in Silicon Valley, but entrepreneurs, engineers, tech executives in San Francisco Bay Area didn't know one another. So we started building the community from the ground up, one conversation at a time, one meeting at a time, one introduction at a time. Today, we are engaging thousands all over the Bay Area and in many regions of Brazil, US, and even Europe. So right now, our community is of over 15,000 people. We've connected, introduced over 100 Brazilian and American small and mid-sized businesses. We've had so far over 150 both private and public events with in-depth discussions such as what we are going to have today. And we are fostering entrepreneurship by facilitating entrepreneurs' access to mentors, to investors, to tech leaders for potential partnerships. So we all know what happened to BRICS and the economic fallout of Brazil. However, its entrepreneurial community continued developing, and BayBrazil has been playing a part in it. Here is how. In 2012, we launched the BayBrazil Annual Conference at Stanford University. We gathered entrepreneurs, investors, and private sector leaders to discuss technology, innovation, and the roles of Brazil and the US in the global economy. Our conference is now in its 9th edition. Not only we are presenting in-depth dialogues, but we are offering entrepreneurs and tech leaders the opportunity to meet and learn from one another. And also from prominent founders such as Brian Acton, co-founder of WhatsApp, and Mike Krieger, co-founder of Instagram, here at our conference at Google in 2017. And the latest in-person editions of our conference were at LinkedIn in San Francisco and at SRI International in Menlo Park. And some of you who are joining us today wearing all of these conferences. So here are some of the programs that we are building for our partners, for the entrepreneurs and the leaders in our ecosystem to connect and learn from one another. We also have been interviewing leaders both from Brazil and the US to add information and inspiration to our hub. Nina Silva, for example, is the founder of Movimento Black Money, which encourages entrepreneurship and education in the Brazilian Black community. We are encouraging donations to her organization. BayBrazil is proud to partner with key players, both in Silicon Valley and Brazil, who are committed to strengthening our bilateral innovation hub. BayBrazil Board of Directors embodies a cross-section of Brazilian American executives who I'm having the pleasure to work with and having the support to help me shape and grow our organization throughout these years. And today, I'm very pleased to have one of them here with us, one of our board members, Avanish Sahai. Hey, here he is. Hi, Avanish, good to see you.
Hey, Margarise, welcome. Good to see you. And obviously, congratulations on these amazing 10 years. It's been a fantastic journey and delighted to be a small part of it with you.
I'm very honored that you are part of this journey with us, Avanish. So Avanish Sahai, who's going to be moderating our event today, is I do have his bio here. I just have to find here it is. He's Global VP ISV and Apps at Google, an Indian-born, Brazil-raised, US education, senior tech, executive, investor, and entrepreneur. In addition to his role at BayBrazil, he is also board member of HubSpot and is on the board of trustees of the World Affairs Council. Wonderful to have you here to update us on cloud computing, Avanish. Thank you for that, and thank you for being with us in this journey at BayBrazil.
Margarise, as always, thank you, and excited to be here and have some great panelists to talk to the audience about what are some of the key trends, how does cloud computing and then also 5G and mobility, how will they change the landscape? So I thought I'd start with just a few slides that I think summarize some of the big trends and kind of what we are seeing. So let me just bring that up and let me know when you can see it. Okay. So first off, just to talk a bit about the trends, and I think it is important to acknowledge that we're in a very unusual time, and COVID and coronavirus, I think, are really going to change the landscape. So I talked this about 2020, and post-COVID. And for the Brazilians on the line, I want to make sure, in addition to the things that Margarise mentioned about Google Cloud and HubSpot in Brazil, I'm also Corintiano, which is a very important attribute. So if you look back a few months of what's happened between February, March, and now, this quote from Satya Nadella from Microsoft, I think, really captures what is a key issue. He says, we saw 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months. Digital transformation is a big topic. It's a big trend. It means different things to different people. But ultimately, it really means how do you engage differently with your customers, your employees, your partners, your ecosystem as a whole, right? And every company, every organization may be doing that a little bit differently. But when we talk about digital transformation, one of the big things is companies that are not going to do it or not doing it well may not survive. So just take a look at this slide, right? On the left side, these are brands that have declared bankruptcy in the past 90 days in the US. A couple of these are global brands, but they're especially US-centric brands. And some of them have been around for decades. On the right side, you see what I call newcomers. And these are companies that have hit record sales and market capitalization in that same 90-day period, right? What's different? Well, the companies on the left have been very traditional. Many of them have not reinvented themselves as they need to. And the companies on the right, frankly, are the enablers of those who are going to survive and kind of make into the next, the next phase, right? So the assessment here is companies have to digitally transform. And those companies on the right, who are all either cloud computing companies or are running on cloud computing, are the ones that are enabling this next phase. So my argument is companies have to transform. If they don't, they'll die. And cloud computing is one of the big underlying enablers. In addition to that, COVID is, unfortunately or fortunately for some of these companies, is the great accelerator. This data on the right side may be a little bit difficult to read, but it's from a research just from June, 2 months ago, from JP Morgan. And they interviewed a number of CIOs across the world. And what they basically said is that because of COVID, there is a huge acceleration in their spend in how much more they're going to spend in IT and in digital transformation, right? And if you look at that, pretty much across the board, there is going to be great growth, which is the top bar there, or at least maintaining their spend. But ultimately, they have to digitally transform. And the move to public cloud is what helps drive that. And to support that point even further, here's again from that same research from JP Morgan, some additional data that says, how do you look at this 5 years out? How is the cloud spending going to change on public clouds? And public clouds include Salesforce, AWS, Azure, Workday, Google Cloud, ServiceNow. Many of these are public cloud-based companies. And if you look at the trend, it is pretty dramatic. It is pretty substantial. And more of the budgets, of the IT budgets in organizations, are going to be consumed by cloud computing, right? And public cloud computing at that. And to even further mention that point, just in terms of basic numbers, today, if you look at the chart here in the middle, about 20% of the IT spend is in cloud computing. 5 years from now, this research shows that number is going to grow to over 40%. So this is no longer just a fad. Cloud has evolved over the last 10, 15 years. It is how companies want to acquire software and technology. But fundamentally, it's not just about IT. It's not about technology. It is really about how do they transform their businesses so they can survive, thrive, and grow in the next, their next incarnation, next generation, which is very, very fundamental to the core business. So what does this mean, right? And here's a quote from George Soros, and again, recent, basically saying, nobody knows how capitalism will survive or evolve amid the pandemic. So what does this mean to entrepreneurs, investors, technologists like all of us who are on this call, right? I look at that in a few core themes. So first, think about experience. You have to think about the user experience. And this can be the employee can be a user, your customer is a user, your partners are users, your prospective customers are users, right? And this statement, 53% of people will abandon a mobile site if it takes longer than 3 seconds to load. This is an experience issue. This is a usability issue, right? And there's a number of data like this that you have to think about how cloud is a delivery mechanism and is going to be consumed through things like a mobile app or a mobile device. So phones, iPads, etc. So thinking that through is very, very critical. And then as you think about some of the big growth that's happening, and again, some recent data from companies like Zoom, like Google, like Microsoft, right? Tremendous growth in, for example, how some of their collaboration applications are being consumed and used, right? Just the numbers are staggering in terms of number of daily users, in terms of new users, how much they use. I, for example, spend most of my day in Google Meet now, right? That's how we're running our business all day long, right? And a lot of our customers, partners, etc., are all doing this. And in order to do that, to manage that growth, you have to be ready to manage that growth. You have to have the infrastructure. You have to have the ability to scale very quickly. I was talking to a telecom company who said in the old days, they were set up to maybe provision 2,000 to 3,000 new business customers a day. 2,000 to 3,000, okay? In the first 2 weeks of COVID, they had to provision 80,000 customers in a day, per day. That meant they had to have the capacity to very quickly turn on all their systems to deliver that. That growth is not just in these examples that we have here. It really happens across the board. It's happening in every core business. And you have to have the infrastructure, the processes, and the systems to do that, right? So you have to be ready to grow. Once you grow, you have to be ready to support the growth. Here's some data from Zendesk that shows how the number of tickets have increased because there's way more people using those technologies. People using it for customer support, people using it to communicate, people using it to engage. And therefore, not only do you have to be ready to support to have to be ready to grow, you have to be ready to support the growth. So thinking about this from how you deliver your customer experience and then how you deliver the support to those customers and those partners is absolutely critical, right? And then finally, and this will be one of the topics we'll talk about today as well, not only do you have to grow and support that growth, you also have to grow securely, right? Safety and security and data integrity become critical. And referring again to that, some of the data from JP Morgan research, you can see that some of the most critical spend as companies look forward is around identity and access management. How do I make sure that the right people, do I know them, that they have access to the information, right? How do we make sure that endpoint security, all the devices that are connected, people are using bring your own devices, right? You have home devices. Are they securely connecting? Are they subject to viruses? Are they subject to phishing, etc.? So all those things become critical as you think about this transition to a much more digital experience, enabled by the cloud, experienced in the mobile, but then it has to be secure. So in summary, cloud is the enabler of digital transformation. COVID is an accelerator, and you have to think about experience, support, and security to make sure that when you come out of this, when we all come out of this, there is the right level of technology to engage with, again, customers, employees, partners, and others. So with that, I'm delighted to welcome a couple of our panelists. And in this first part of the panel, two guests. One is Nitin Rao, Vice President at Cloudflare. And two is Noam Bizman, a former colleague of mine at ServiceNow. So delighted to welcome Nitin and Noam to the conversation.
Thank you, Avanish. Great to be here, and happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you on behalf of BayBrazil and the whole community. Really amazing how far we've come with Margarise's leadership. So, hey, Nitin, thank you. So just to kick it off, maybe each of you can take a few minutes, maybe start with Nitin, let's talk a bit about Cloudflare, the company, and where you play. Just give people a bit of background, and then what your role is over there.
Sure. So thanks so much for having me, and congratulations on 10 years. Like that's a really impressive milestone, and appreciate all the work that's done, sort of connecting the technology communities. I think that's important in general, but it's especially important right now to have that community. I get the opportunity to lead our global infrastructure at Cloudflare, and Cloudflare really sits behind the scenes, providing security, performance, and reliability for a significant portion of the internet. There are about 27 million internet properties that run their traffic through Cloudflare, and we're able to ensure that the internet is as safe and fast as we can keep it. In order to do that behind the scenes, we run a large global network, and that network includes, for example, a number of data centers in Brazil. So it's been interesting to see the last several months.
Great. Noam, maybe you can do the same with yourself and a bit of your background.
Yeah, thanks. So ServiceNow, we are a publicly traded Bay Area public cloud company. Thinking back to your slides, you wrote there in summary, experience is one of the key components. That's really the part we focus on. We focus on helping our customers build and deliver great experiences to their customers and employees by developing great workflows. So we say that we make workflow across systems, silos, departments, and processes. We connect everything and help customers, drive this fierce customer loyalty and this powerful employee engagement by delivering powerful experiences. And what I do, my role at the company is really to do all of that in Latin America.
Fantastic. So just to kick off the conversation a little bit more depth, and maybe again, Noam, since you have the mic, talk a bit about, you talk about digital transformation, talk about the experience. It is obviously a critical part, and it is enabled by some of the cloud architecture. What are some of the most interesting stories that you've seen, and particularly since you spent so much time in Latin America, some unique stories that maybe are relevant to that market so that the audience can hear about what are some of those, how those trends are connecting in that market?
So, there are many stories. One of the more recent ones, I won't say the name, but it won't be too hard to guess. It's a very large, probably the largest company in Latin America, definitely in Brazil, energy conglomerate. And they have, as part of their turnaround, they have a board level initiative to reduce the time that it takes them from when they make a discovery of oil or gas until they can actually start having production. So they call this time from discovery to first oil. And they have a board level initiative to reduce the time it takes them to do that from 3,000 days to 1,000 days. The problem is that while it's very easy to say discovery to first oil, there are many projects and processes that are involved in getting that to happen. So 3,000 days, that's like 10 years, right? So you have to design, let's say an oil platform. You have to procure all the parts, and then you have to build them. Many projects, sub-projects across different silos, departments, programs. They took the initiative to digitally transform, put all those processes on a single platform like ours, and the return on investment is huge. Think about it, from 3,000 days to 1,000 days, you get extra 6 years of revenue, right? Extra 6 years of revenue. So that's one very inspiring example. Another one, a totally different sector, probably one of the largest private university chains in the world is actually from Brazil. And until not very recently, last year, most of their interaction with their students was face-to-face. Luckily, they had the vision that this needed to change. This was not COVID driven nor even accelerated, but they were ready for COVID because with us, they now manage most of their interaction with their students / customers. So anything from registration, enrollment, payment, issues that they manage it online, and more than 50% of it is now done in a self-service way. So obviously this is very transformational. And I don't think it takes a lot of imagination to think, what would that have looked like if they were not prepared for it when COVID hit? So these are some of the examples, but there are really examples all over the place when you talk about engagement with your customer or engagement with your employees. We see this trend, like literally every slide that you showed is a slide that I could have written myself based on what we're seeing. There's no doubt 2 years of progress was done in less than 2 months. This is very visible. You're on mute, so I'm.
Yep, thanks. No, that's phenomenal, right? And those are great examples of very large, established, what could say traditional companies, right, are having to reinvent how they do business. And just to build on that a little bit, Noam, before we come to Nitin, how would that have been? You've been in this industry for some time. How would that have even been possible in a pre-cloud world? Could someone like the companies you described, the organization described, how's that even possible? It's a leading question, but.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible. I mean, and you see the difference between those who did it, or embracing it. Not everyone is accelerating, by the way. So we did see 2 years worth of acceleration, but not everyone is doing it. And we're seeing a clear separation, I would say, into 3 groups of organizations: those that embrace and accelerate the digital transformation, thinking, this is my opportunity to gain more market share, to differentiate, to come out of this stronger. There are those that, take a defensive approach, like if I just wait long enough, this will go away. They're probably, the market is probably going to get eaten by the first ones. And then there are those who are still trying to make up their mind in which group they're going to be. We're seeing very clear difference in the corporate posture, in the leadership, speed, agility. So it's not, to your question, it's not something I need to hypothesize. I can see what's happening to those who don't change. There are companies out there that are, have employees at home because they're not allowed to go to the office, and they don't have ways to conduct business remotely. They don't have ways. It could be as basic as they don't even have laptops for everyone. They don't have phones for everyone. They definitely don't have, the systems and the processes. And, as they report results, you see them. And they were on the left-hand side of your first slide.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I'll give a very quick example to that point, right? I was talking to someone that I know very well. He represents one of the very big Indian technology firms. And the typical Indian technology firm has actually, historically, has these very, very nice, dense offices. It's a office-centric culture where all the teams work together and there's floors by client and so on. It turns out when COVID hit, they had to shift that. So they described to me 2 things. One, they had to provision all the typical employee in these organizations actually would use a desktop computer, because that way it stayed on premise. It didn't, there was nothing that could move and so on. So on short notice, they had to provision 150,000 laptops. Purchase, configure, provision, deliver, and get them to work, right? And they said they did it. They said now, all of a sudden, they're a technology company, right? They said we didn't have to do this before, but now we have moved to this model where it's going to be, everything's going to be in the cloud. It is secure, it is available, and we are 150,000 people from offices to work from home in the cloud. right? That's in the sector. That's the kind of transformation that people are undergoing. So we'll come back to but Nitin, to that point, obviously with Cloudflare's background in security, and you described a bit of the breadth of what you folks do and cover. Talk a bit about how companies are operating. What has that meant? What has that meant to the security business as a whole? And what are some of the trends that you folks see as part of that growth?
So I think the last several months have been particularly interesting. I was telling someone I don't think I've known the 2 blocks around my house. I didn't think I would know it as well as I do right now, but I know it just incredibly well. And I was following the news around, but even so, it wasn't until I had a line outside our local grocery store, and I saw it for the first time and had this surreal moment and realized, well, I guess I need to go stand in line as well. That you realize that really the world had changed so much. And obviously the heroes at this moment are the healthcare workers, as sort of numbers tick up. But in some ways, the helpful sidekick has been the internet. And so the internet, which was in many ways built for this, has in some ways made what is continues to be a challenging time a little less painless, because it helps us continue to engage in all the activities, sort of personal and professional, that we otherwise would. It's also a moment when we often feel helpless. And so one of the things that, as an operations executive at an infrastructure company, it sort of, our entire team was both going through this personal transition, but felt like we found ourselves in one of those rare roles where you could actually make a difference. Like we actually have an earnings call in a couple of minutes, but in our last earnings call, we described how we added more traffic increased peak traffic by more during 12 weeks than the prior 12 months combined. And so it's surreal that you've got literally, essential workers helping ship gear to all over the world, including Brazil, because the internet is changing how we function. It's also changed the security aspect, because you can't, buy more VPN boxes and get people licenses and the like. And so we've both personally as an organization been able to adapt, but we've also been able to help both really small and really large organizations adapt to exactly what you described, both the higher loads on their network, but also people just accessing critical infrastructure from their own personal devices. And so that's been really interesting to witness and feel a little less helpless, because we're able to play a part.
It's a global phenomenon. This is a global phenomenon, right? So this is not it's not centralized in the Americas or Western Europe. What are some of the internet?
Interesting to sort of see the variance. So, for example, again, as an infrastructure person, we saw more traffic growth in Latin America, in particularly Brazil, than almost anywhere in the world. And so there is, in some ways, there's this sort of secular phenomenon across the world where all of us are adapting, but I think it's certainly more pronounced in some parts of the world. Sorry, you were saying.
No, I was going to say, I mean, to that point, I think that's exactly where I was headed. Is I'm assuming that was not all Netflix, right? So there's people working and there's people doing other kind of activities. How do you see that pattern? How do you see that a bit of that international growth? And are there differences in what are priorities or how the people are consuming? Just give us a bit of a flavor just from your operational perspective of
Sure.
what is that global perspective?
Sure. So a person like me looks at graphs for a lot of time in the day, and so it's very interesting that the concept of a peak hour has changed, because there are now multiple peaks in the day when folks use the internet. Like even just personally, I have seen that my work day has changed a lot, because the transition between work and personal blurs a lot more. And so I find myself going going back and forth. But it's really across the board. I don't have any children myself, but my friends who do have kids tell me how they're adapting to having their kids learn from home, and so that's an interesting transition as well. There are also folks who are in the Bay Area, for example, who are leaving the Bay Area and working in other towns and working from the mountains, and it makes sense from a quality of life perspective, but it also changes how you're accessing critical services. So you have colleagues who could really be in almost any corner of the world, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Like it's just sort of fundamentally changed how we think about working with our colleagues. In some ways, again, on a personal note, it has also been an equalizer because we just kept hiring through all of it and continue to do interviewing and sending offers and onboarding new team members, and just had to adapt. But in some ways, it made it sort of almost more equal, because you could have a new team member starting in Lisbon, or you could have new team members starting in Miami, and it didn't feel like they were at a disadvantage. It felt like they were like any other team member, because we were all going through this shared experience, and like you said, lots of Google Meet calls.
You can say Zoom as well. It's okay.
Or Zoom.
So let's shift to the part of this. The topic really is to look forward, right? So we're talking about what's happening over the last few years and months. And I'll be honest, I got into the SaaS cloud business about 10 years ago at Salesforce. And at the time, there's a lot of people still felt, I think like Noam was saying, this was a bit of a fad. Right? Hey, this will go away. It's for small business. No large business will ever think about it because there's all these issues of control and security and so on. And now, let's face it, some of the large organizations in the world are running the majority of their business in cloud-based environments, right? So now let's look forward a little bit. One of the themes here is the next 10 years, right? We're celebrating the 10 years of BayBrazil, but then what's coming forward? So maybe Noam, starting with you. You spend a lot of time talking to, large customers, prospects, partners. If you were to put on your crystal ball, right? What's going to be different in 5, 7, 10 years as you go back to this large energy company, as you go back to this university, or other customers? How are they seeing the future? What is the outlook, and what's going to be very different than what's been done before?
I think one of the key elements is the realization that speed, agility wins. That's really the key ingredient that separates you from everyone else. It's like it's not power, it's not size, it's speed. It's your ability to adapt and to react and take advantages of what's going on. So in that context, I think low code, no code is where this is heading. It's the ability to capitalize on business opportunities, changing market conditions, and building offers very quickly. And if you want to achieve speed, time to market, then you need to do this with the people who are closest to the market. And those are, the business areas. So I see decentralization. I see the I don't want to call it the power, but I see the ability shifting to those business units to develop their offerings, their services, their products, their processes, without so much depending on a centralized IT to do that. Now, that having been said, I see the role of the centralized IT is changing, right? Becoming more of a more strategic role of how do we make sure that we have the underlying platform, the underlying architecture, the underlying partnerships and structures to enable this? How do we make sure that we, the way we approach, agile versus waterfall, et cetera, that the way we approach project management and governance is the right one to encourage speed and agility. So that's what I think is, that's what I'm hearing from the customers as something that they're beginning to value. And one of the interesting things is that, 2 years ago, or up until 2 years ago, most of our conversations, when we said we were having executive level conversations, we probably had them with the CIO, right? And we had them with IT. Today, we're having them most of them with the COO, because it's about operations. I think, 3 to 5 years from now, it's going to be a CEO and board level discussion. Because if you're not making the right decision, a COVID-like event could kill you or make you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I completely agree with that. I think it's a great perspective. And it may be the same question to you. How do you see it from your vantage point? Again, 5, 7, 10 years. Obviously, security is paramount. We talk a bit about that. But
Yeah.
what else do you see? What are some of the changes and trends that you see coming?
Yeah. So there's for one, we're clearly headed for more remote teams. And I think the definition of what remote is means different things for different people. Even for a company like Cloudflare, we're talking about how, where do you fall somewhere between tolerating remote work and encouraging remote work. But the idea of being at the absolute bookends, I think, seems less realistic. And so we'll all have to adapt to that. And exactly like Noam mentioned, that changes what an IT team does, because you're really playing a role around governance and how sort of the controls are in place as team members in different parts of the world, even from their homes, receive their devices and they're off to the races, and you still want to have the same high productivity you'd expect. I'm also hopeful. I really don't know the answer, because there's some days I wake up and it feels like the largest technology companies are only going to become larger as a result of what's happening. So maybe that happens. But I'm also optimistic that in some ways it can create a level playing field. That you could be a developer in Fortaleza starting off, and you have access to the same tools as an internet giant would. And so I'm optimistic that at least over time, great companies are born out of a crisis, and so they're likely entrepreneurs right now who are heads down, focused, building really interesting companies. And so I'm hopeful. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm hopeful we get a more level playing field because of this, and the fact that there's innovation in more parts of the world would be a good thing.
I think that's a fantastic point. And frankly, when I used to travel, I've spent a lot of time in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, in Australia, in India. And frankly, in the last 5 to maybe 7, 8 years, the intensity of innovation and the level of, frankly, creativity, right, that you see in solutions. And sometimes they are, solutions to a local or regional problem. But more often than not, it's people who are looking to say, hey, I'm solving this problem, but I think this problem is applies to a broad range of companies or individuals, and the aspirations are to bring it global, right? And for us to think that all innovation is going to be among a few big companies and in a few, very short list of locations, I think that's something of the past. And I like to think that, again, the technologies of that we're talking about today, actually, right? Cloud, mobility, security, they're going to help that type of innovation. There's no lack of expertise, there's no lack of IQ. It's a question of how you can package it and then deliver it in a seamless fashion. That's terrific. So we're at the time for this part of the conversation. I wanted to open up to questions from the audience, and I think Margarise was going to help us see what questions are coming in from the attendees.
No
Margarise?
yet, Avanish.
No questions yet? Well, let's ask them again, please. We're open to questions, all three of us. We can certainly continue talking. It's, as you can tell, it's a very experienced group and a thoughtful conversation. So happy to continue. But if any questions, please type them in either into the Facebook page or in the chat over here as well. So as we wrap up, we've all had different kind of roles and different types of backgrounds. What advice would you give to someone, let's say someone on the call or someone who watches the replay is a student and someone who is thinking about what their career is, and they know of Microsoft, they know of Google, they know of ServiceNow, etc. Any advice to a budding entrepreneur? Noam, you talked a lot about experiences, for example. Nitin, you talked a lot about scale and kind of how do you build, think about this globally. Let's put on our advisory hats. And what's one piece of advice you would give to someone who's thinking about what they should be doing?
Well, you mentioned Google, ServiceNow, or Cloudflare. Yes, join them. Go to one of these companies. Yes, get good grades. My oldest is about to start college remotely later this month. So if you're a young student, absolutely work hard. Make sure you get into one of these top tier organizations, because that's really part of your education. It's not the the final destination. It's part of your education. But personally, and thankfully my son shares this, I've always, since I was about his age, I've always been fascinated by the world of technology and the world of business, and mostly by how those two interact, right? Yeah. How the world, the business of technology and the technology of business. I like that. So, if you're, I think technology is going to continue driving business, which means that the business of technology is going to continue and thrive. And if that's something that's of interest to a person, and I guess otherwise they wouldn't be on a call like ours, I would just say, make sure you always understand what business issues are being solved, right? What they are and how they're being solved. And then if you think you have a better way of solving them, or if you see a business issue that's not being solved, go for it, right? But to me, that's, if you don't know, the big problem is when you don't know what to do, where to look for, what's your passion. So when you join one of those, big organizations, you're going to have a good opportunity to observe and figure out what it is that attracts you and keeps you motivated and engaged. Does that make sense?
It makes tons of sense. It's great advice.
50% success. I succeeded with one of them. The other one is not interested at all in that.
Well, hey, 50-50 is a good return. I have a son who just graduated from college, and he's going to start his career also remotely next month, and he's joining one of the big consulting firms. And same advice, right? So how you understand customer issues, I understand customer problems. And one thing I will say is not everybody has to be an engineer. And it's an important aspect of this. A lot of us are engineers, but it is not all about just being a technologist. It is about experience, it is about design, it's about being curious and understanding how to get to the root of that problem. And often someone who's not the technical person, in fact, mostly, is going to actually be much more effective at that. Nitin, how about you? Any advice?
So congratulations on your kids' graduation. That's a
Thank you.
Milestone. I miss being a student. It's and so if you're a student, know that I'm just incredibly envious of you, because you can reach out, and especially now, to pretty much anyone in the world, and who is not going to reply to a student? Like every single person will reply to you. And so you can, like now more than ever, you can reach out to anybody. And at some level, like we're all looking for a community. We're looking to have a conversation with, like I am with someone who's not my dog. And so you reach out and you'll be surprised how many people, no matter where they live in the world, are happy to have a conversation with you. And if you're an entrepreneur, like one of the advantages you have is focus. Like as organizations get larger and larger and larger, they're less laser focused than you are as an entrepreneur. And so that's a huge advantage you have. You should run with it as fast as you can.
That's great. Hey, so we actually have 2 questions from the attendees. So let me play those out, and one of them is for Nitin, and the other I think is perhaps for all of us. So Nitin, you mentioned the enormous surge in usage in Brazil. Do you have any data on what may be driving that?
Yeah, I noticed I got the less controversial of the 2 questions, so I'm kind of just waiting for Noam's answer to the other one. Unfortunately, I didn't dig into the data for Brazil. I know that Brazil is one of the sources of traffic. I think it was just secular across the board, from everything from news to some really interesting sort of IoT devices that let you do things like that saw a surprising uptake. So really across the board. Yeah.
All right. And yes, the second question, maybe a little bit more controversial. And Noam, I can help you with this one too. Can you identify leaders and laggards in Brazil? Are we falling behind? And if so, where? Are we becoming more unequal and less able to compete?
So I guess there are 2 angles to this question. One is in Brazil, in the Brazilian market, and then I guess the other one is Brazil versus the rest
of the world. Yeah, that's right.
I'll start with that one. I would say this. It took a while for Brazil, at least from our point of view, it took a while for Brazil to spring into action. We've definitely seen a period of, I don't know, maybe a few weeks, maybe 4 weeks, where many organizations were kind of like, I guess, in that middle group, deciding to figure out, is this for real? What are we going to do, et cetera? Where at the same time, other parts of the world, they were already taking action. And we can see that, by the way, through some of our apps that we released to deal with the crisis, where people were deploying them. But I can definitely tell you that in a very true Brazilian style, once organization started to take action, they did it in force, they did it in creativity, they've done it to a scale and a level that's also not very common out there. So I don't think that at this point, Brazil as a whole is far behind other countries, maybe even less than normally, right? Like if normally we're not early adopters, we were waiting to see, we were a cycle or 2 behind the US. I think at the end of this, the gap is actually going to end up being small. And in terms of leaders and laggards within Brazil, I can't name names, but it's very obvious. You have organizations that are taking defensive postures, and you have organizations there that are seeing that and deciding this is our opportunity to eat their market share, and they're doing it. You see it in the financial sector, you see it in the telco, you see it everywhere. So it's going to shift, but I think I truly believe that after this is over and done with, the technological gap between Brazil and, say, the US is going to be slightly smaller. I think this is driving an accelerated pace of acceleration here.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think there's a bit of democratization happening. I've seen venture investments happening there. I've seen some amazing stories of companies building in Brazil for the global market, building in Latin America for a broader, and frankly, they're not copying stuff, they're building innovative from the ground up type of solutions, and then figuring out how to bring them to the rest of the market. So I'm with you on that. I think things are finally catching up. And by the way, the same applies to India too, since I wear both those hats. Yeah. Hey, it's 2:00. I know Noam has another appointment. I cannot thank you both enough. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for helping us celebrate the 10 years of BayBrazil, and stay safe.
Thank you for having me, and congratulations again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And for the audience, we are going to switch topics a little bit, and we're going to continue on the theme of what's coming next. And we're going to invite a couple of our new panelists or additional panelists to join us as well. So with that, I want to make sure I'm doing this the right way. Margarise, are you joining us again, or should I just continue?
No, go ahead and continue. I think Alexandre is ready for his presentation.
Terrific. So the next panelists are Alexandre Vilela from Qualcomm Ventures. I'll ask him to introduce himself, and Herman Pais from Microsoft. So welcome, Alexandre and Herman. Maybe a quick intro, and then we'll go into Alexandre's presentation. Alexandre, you're on mute. Sorry. Still on mute.
Okay, so
there we go.
Okay, that's fantastic. So first of all, thank you very much for the time, and you pronounced my name in a perfect way, so I appreciate that. And for Margarise is a great friend, and congratulations for 10 years. BayBrazil is a great initiative, super visible here in US. So super happy to participate on this.
Thank you, Alexandre. Thank you, and welcome you both. Welcome, Alexandre and Herman.
Yeah, and more than anything else, it's a privilege to have you as a friend. So.
Oh,
that's very true. Very true. Herman, maybe a quick introduction, and then we'll come back to Alexandre for his presentation.
All right. So good afternoon, Avanish, Margarise, Alexandre. Thank you very much for having me here. So I'll give a quick introduction. I was Avanish's successor at Boston University back in the late 80s as a research assistant. So Avanish did his master's degree, and I joined the master's degree program at BU just after Avanish graduated. And I had the very hard job of filling into his awesome team. And this was in the late 80s. And after that, I joined a company right there in Massachusetts, EMC. I worked with EMC for 15 years. Then I moved to Oracle, worked 5 years with Oracle. And since 2014, I've been working in the cloud. I've been working first with AWS. I was 5.5 years with AWS, half of these in Brazil. And in 2016, I moved back up here, up to North America, to Canada, to open AWS Canada. Then AWS moved me here to Seattle. And here in Seattle, I moved to Microsoft. So I am moving across the cloud now, from the AWS cloud to the Azure cloud. And it's an honor and a privilege being here. And congrats to you and the team for such a successful organization. And thank you for having me, for the privilege of being here today.
Thank you, Herman. So we'll come back to you with some more questions. With this, let me switch it back to Alexandre for his presentation around 5G and mobility. Alexandre.
Okay, wonderful. So let me share my screen here. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So just to say a few words about myself. So I've been working with Qualcomm Ventures for 3 years roughly, and I have 2 responsibilities at Qualcomm. One is Latin America. So Qualcomm has a portfolio of 14 companies in the region. We are super active, 3 unicorns in the portfolio, more to come. Super proud of that. And my second responsibility is here in US. Qualcomm launched a 5G fund last year. So focus around investment in innovative companies that are doing innovation around 5G. So that's also part of my responsibility in the company. So I'm gonna talk a few things about 5G. Just to say a few words about Qualcomm. I promise that it's gonna be the only time during the presentation that I'm gonna talk about Qualcomm, right? So Qualcomm is one of those large companies that nobody really knows about unless you work in this particular industry. Qualcomm has been driving the emerging intelligent and hyper-connected world in the last 30 years. So Qualcomm is focused on system-level innovation that helps to transform the world in terms of communication. So in the last 30 years, the company has been super focused around interconnecting people, right? And we are super excited because the coming 30 years for us is going to be much, it's very exciting. We are in a much broader journey, I would say. So we want to connect not only people, but also all the devices. We want to make the devices much more, make the devices smarter, much more intelligent, and connected to the cloud with our technology. So Qualcomm is one of the pioneers in this connectivity world. We are one of the companies that created the standards for 2G, 3G, and now for 4G, and now for 5G. So when it comes to 5G, this is a very important statement in terms of the power of 5G. 5G, now this is the first time in history where wireless technology becomes superior, becomes a superior network technology. So 5G is bringing to us certain innovations around data speeds, around latency, that's going to touch every single industry and every single vertical, right? So being a little bit more specific about that, every new generation of communication brings one type of innovation. So 2G was around digital voice, 3G was the early internet, 4G was very, very important. 4G brought us the app economy, brought us broadband, pervasive broadband. So, the backbone of 4G allowed companies like Uber and Airbnb to emerge in the first place. And with 5G, we are going to see that perhaps even more exponentialized, right? So 5G really brings innovation in three key domains. I will speak about that. And in terms of economic impact, we believe that 5G will generate something around $30 trillion in terms of economic impact by 2035. So many countries understand that 5G is very relevant, is part of a strategic agenda for CIOs of every single large company, and also is part of a strategic agenda for governments. So as you know, I mean, China and the US are really eager to be the most advanced countries in terms of new technologies, and with 5G is not different. There is no difference. So talking about 5G, we have three main innovations from customer standpoint. So the first one is around enhanced mobile broadband. This is a fancy word to call mobile data speeds, right? So 5G is going to be 10 to 20 times faster than the current 4G networks. To bring this to a more practical way to see, so imagine that today, whenever we want to download the music, that takes a few seconds. With 5G, we are going to download a HD movie in few seconds. So it's gonna take 5% of the time that used to take with LTE, right? So it's very, very powerful in that sense. And that brings innovations that are very, very interesting around, for instance, immersive reality. So with virtual reality, immersive reality, 5G will allow people to consume, to learn in a completely different fashion, right? So you're going to have access to rich content in a much faster way, right? In a real-time way. So, and that will revolutionize the way we learn, we shop, and we experience things, right? The second innovation is around mission critical services. So this is a way to say that 5G applications will have a very low latency or very low response time. So imagine that there are a set of applications that really demand a very rapid time, very rapid response time from the network. So you can imagine, for instance, self-driving cars, for instance. This is a good example. So in case of self-driving cars, ideally you want your car to communicate with the highway, and whenever there is an accident, you want to be informed, right, as to prevent that particular accident. So this kind of speed and this kind of latency will be allowed with 5G. So that's another interesting innovation. The combination of low latency and high data speeds will enable applications such as remote surgeries in telemedicine, for instance. In the limit, you can even have like your social presence using 5G meaning that you can even have your holographic image being projected somewhere, right? And that being synchronized with your physical presence in a way that those things are almost synchronized, almost perfectly synchronized. So that's going to be a revolution in many, many verticals. And the third use case for 5G is around massive Internet of Things. So the innovation here is that 5G brings an architecture that allows billions of devices to be connected to the internet in a way that there is no performance degradation. So it's very, very powerful in that sense as well. So, so basically this slide just shows some of the numbers I mentioned. So from a consumer standpoint, what is important to say here is that we are going to experience a speed that is 10 to 20x faster than what we have today in our smartphones. There is the latency that I just mentioned. So whenever you are browsing the internet, you are going to have the impression that you are always connected to the cloud, which is very, very, very powerful. And also for the telcos, for the operators, 5G brings economic benefits as well, right? So there is a great spectrum efficiency, which means that the cost for the telcos to transmit information from a smartphone all the way to the cloud is reduced. So that's the kind of innovation we are seeing. And in practical terms, that means that we are bringing the cloud, the power of the cloud very close to the consumption point, very close to the user, right? So this is a little bit about how 5G is being deployed worldwide. So right now we have 60 operators that already have services using 5G, some of them in US. Just in Brazil, just in the last few weeks, 3 operators announced that they will have 5G services by the second half of the year. So that's amazing. We have more than 300 operators that are investing in 5G currently and have plans to launch. So by 2022, we are going to have 750 million smartphone devices being shipped. This is roughly 50% of the total sales for smartphones. So it's a very material number. And we are going to have 1 billion connections by 2023. So whenever we have these technology transitions, we compare those with the previous generations. And if we compare that against 4G, 5G is being introduced in a much faster way. It's almost 2 years faster than 4G. It took 2 years more for 5G to reach 1 billion connections. So this is really, really amazing, really fast. So one of the things that, this can be a little bit more technical, but one of the things that really intrigues me and is very exciting also from a VC standpoint is the combination of technologies, right? So in this case, 5G and AI. The reality is the benefits of artificial intelligence, they are exponentialized with the power of 5G. So just to give you a high level view of how those things will work, 5G is going to be the intelligent connectivity fabric that will connect the cloud all the way to the user, right? So in a way that whenever you have an application or service that demand, very low latency, right? So think again about self-driving cars where you really need to receive that information in a timely fashion. Those applications will run very close to the consumption points or very close to the users, while other applications that are more performance intensive, right, where the latency doesn't matter so much, those applications will run in the cloud. So having this intelligent connectivity fabric that somehow figures out where certain applications or workloads should run becomes a very, very powerful enabler for new services, right? So, and just to finalize here, I mentioned in the beginning that 5G is going to touch different verticals, but in a very profound way. So just to give a few examples, so take healthcare as an example. One of the, I would say, winners during pandemic is a company, just to give an example, is a company called Teladoc. Just yesterday, they announced an acquisition of a competitor, not a competitor, but a company in the same space. They paid $16 billion for that acquisition. And we are super excited about the potential of telemedicine with 5G. So 5G will allow, remote diagnosis, right? There is even possibility of doing remote surgeries, right? So imagine, for instance, Brazil is a big country. Imagine a situation where you have someone in the countryside that needs an immediate surgery, and you have an expert that is in São Paulo, right? So how do you connect those two people in a very rich way, in a very fast way, without any kind of latency? So 5G will help with this kind of innovation. There are a few companies that are leading the way in terms of adopting 5G in telemedicine, and I think a good example of how hot this sector is this company called Teladoc. So this is one example. Another example that I think is very, very interesting for Brazil is agriculture, right? So imagine a case where you have tractor and harvesting machines connected to the cloud in real time. You are collecting data from multiple sensors in those tractors, so you can send in real time information about the seeds being planted, the distance between the plants, also information about the field itself, temperature, humidity. You send all this information to the cloud in real time, and you receive insights on things that you should do as a farmer to improve your productivity. So also plenty of innovation in this particular area, super exciting. Also another area that we see 5G making a lot of difference. Another one is retail, right? So in retail, you can imagine how 5G can be transformative in the way that people shop, right? So you can have an experience where you can buy online, right, in a very rich way. So suppose that you want to somehow try some new clothes, etc. So with 5G, you're going to have a very rich experience, eventually even having your avatar and trying out different clothes in the comfort of your home, and that becomes a huge selling point for the retailers that have this kind of technology. There are plenty of other examples. Perhaps another one that is very hot is self-driving cars. So as you all know, there are big investments around companies that are trying to automate the driving process and make it safer, right? So 5G is very helpful in that front because we will allow the car to communicate in real time with highways in a way that whenever there is an accident or something that is hard to foresee, so the car can receive that communication and can adjust accordingly. So those are some examples of use cases, right? There are many others. Hopefully that can give you a good sense of what is coming with 5G. Thank you, Avanish.
Thank you, Alexandre. That was fantastic and great examples and great stories. So maybe as we start the conversation, since Alexandre just covered the great overview of both the 5G trend and some of the opportunities, maybe Herman, if we can start with you, talk about what some of the things you're seeing in your roles, and in fact, Alexandre just kind of connected some dots here for us as well around AI and the volume of data, and you're focused on some of the storage world. Talk about what some of the things you're seeing in your role, and how has that changed as you've been in this industry for some time.
Absolutely. So thank you. I'm in Microsoft Azure, so I'm part of the marketplace team, and we deal very interestingly with ISVs, with software developers on a daily basis, and help them promote their products on Azure. What Alexandre just mentioned, the topic of 5G, we call it the intelligent edge. So we say, Microsoft says that the intelligent cloud and the intelligent edge, they complement each other. And that is literally the future of computing, where you have these virtually unlimited
pool of resources, which is the cloud, which is a public cloud, from which you can pull resources, both compute, storage, networking, AI, and where you can connect that in real time at extremely low latencies provided by technologies like 5G to the intelligent edge, and literally powering billions of IoT devices, allowing exactly this future that Alexandre mentioned in his presentation. So we literally see this happening daily. We literally see applications from different verticals, from retail, from healthcare, from even telecom, coming online daily and taking advantage of this intelligent cloud and intelligent edge. Maybe one example that, if you allow me to bring, is right now with COVID. On COVID, we have been working very closely with some of the largest telecommunications operators to use the cell phone as a sensor, because every cell phone you have in your pocket knows where you are, both with GPS and also with reference location to the other radio stations that the telephone is talking to. And you know how many people are in a given space at any given time, how many people are moving through, and who have you been in contact with, who you haven't been in contact with. So eliminating a little bit, not going into the discussion of the big brother aspect of the fact that people are being monitored all the time, this allows us to literally enable very powerful applications for contact tracing, for tracing the spread of COVID, for tracing things like the level of isolation of a population, for tracing the level of people or the number of people coming through public spaces at any given time. So it is a revolution that presents a huge opportunity, particularly for startups, for developers, for innovators, to create new solutions that take advantage of these always on, always connected, omnipresent, omniscient world that complements both the edge and the cloud into very powerful applications.
No, that's great. So those are, I think, good examples. I would love to, I think, again, for this audience, I think there's quite a few entrepreneurs and future entrepreneurs, I think, in the audience. This is one of the big themes for BayBrazil, is really connecting, the technology capitals like San Diego, like San Francisco, like Seattle, with Brazilian investors and entrepreneurs. How should they think about these opportunities? So both of you have given, some amazing innovations that are happening. How does a entrepreneur or a startup go and think about, which opportunities, Alexandre, you mentioned a number of terrific industries, and you kind of brought it to some examples in Brazil in agriculture, healthcare, retailing. How does an entrepreneur who's thinking about something, how do they go get started?
Yeah, you raised a very good point. Just to do some parallel with 4G, right? When 4G started, frankly speaking, the type of use case or the type of killer application that companies like, the telcos or companies like Qualcomm were envisioning for this were very different from what some of the entrepreneurs, some of the startups brought to the market, right? So the key innovation around 4G was around this idea of pervasive mobile broadband for everybody and pervasive GPS, right? When that started, that created, at the dawn of 4G, I think nobody really, imagine use cases such as Uber or Airbnb, right? Those things, when Uber started, as a matter of fact, the founders, the founding team, even had to distribute smartphones with 4G capability to drivers, because unless they had, if they didn't have those devices, they couldn't, really be drivers for the service. So this is what is beautiful about technology, right? Sometimes companies like Qualcomm and Microsoft right? So we come up with the building blocks, right, that are very horizontal, that can serve different verticals, right? But of course, there is a lot of space for innovators to do things on top of that, right? When it comes to Brazil, which I think is most of our audience, right? So I see great potential around logistics, right? So in Brazil, we had the privilege of investing 99, right, which was acquired by Didi. We invested in this company called Logi, this company called CargoX, and whose mission is really to connect, fragmented consumer base with a fragmented supply base, which is basically independent truck drivers or independent motorboys, etc. Right? So, I think those pain points are, are still there, right? If I were to select a few verticals where I think there is a lot of innovation needed, I would say that healthcare is certainly one of those, right? This is a longer conversation, but the whole supply chain, the whole value chain in healthcare is a little bit conflicted the way it is today. And I think there is a lot of space for disruptive innovation, right? So healthcare, for most of markets, represents 10% of the GDP. In countries like US, this is around 16, 17% of the GDP. It's a massive market. I would say that there are certain segments that are really ripe for disruption. For instance, talking about telemedicine, I personally had chance to use telemedicine service during the pandemic. And I tell you, I mean, once you try, it really sticks. I mean, it's really, really interesting, really powerful. And for low complexity cases, I would say that this is going to become mainstream after pandemic. And I scratch my head and I try to think about companies that are, innovating in the space in Brazil. Yeah, I can find some companies, right? But I still think there is critical mass in Brazil to accommodate, large companies, even public companies in this particular space. And I think there are other examples as well, but I just wanted to highlight healthcare because I think this was one of the verticals that was mostly benefited by the shutdown.
Terrific. No, those are great examples. Herman, same question for you, but more on the data-driven AI ML. How does someone get started, and how do they go find out what are some problems that are of the right nature and scale, so that they can build a business or a company around that?
That's a fantastic question. So there are so many opportunities in our view that the hard thing is literally picking the right one. I believe that in addition to healthcare, there is a whole set of industries that have to be reimagined and rethought in the light of this new world that we're going to see going forward, right? If we take a lesson from history, the bubonic plague in the 1500s brought with it the end of the Middle Ages, Renaissance, and it also ended feudalism. It basically broke the whole social and historical and political network that existed, in the Middle Ages, and it made Renaissance possible. It was caused by another pandemic, very similar to this pandemic that we are still in the middle of it. So we do know that some industries will be changed forever, perhaps even destroyed, like travel, transportation. We see in Brazil, Latam asking for bankruptcy protection. We saw Avianca disappearing from the air. You had it in your slide earlier, Hertz. So the entire transportation industry is being transformed, and we, as business professionals, we are going from a lifestyle where we would spend 25, sometimes 75 of our time traveling at airports and at airplanes to now having to work from home many more hours because we work more hours since we don't have to move from place A to place B, and working a lot more intensely with our brains because now same thing, right? You can go from one meeting to another meeting to another meeting, and context switch. So I think that helping humans adapt to this new lifestyle, to this new work style, is going to be a major opportunity for entrepreneurs. And I say that with the knowledge that we see. I have this example at Microsoft with Microsoft Teams. We have this example with Zoom, the tool that we are using today for this conversation. These tools like Teams, like Zoom, like Google Meet, Google Hangouts, these tools saw explosive growth. In the case of Microsoft, the growth was 70 times. 70 times more infrastructure, more compute, more networking. And fortunately, we have the cloud, because if we didn't have the cloud, it would have been impossible to keep up. We saw the utilization of telepresence and virtual conferencing and virtual meeting technologies grow tremendously in this time. And we saw, for example, here in the United States, 70,000 school districts, each school district representing an average of 30 schools, adopting virtual classroom environments. We saw that in Brazil. We saw that all over the planet, right? So for us, the technologies that that facilitate this human adaptation to this new work environment, to this new virtual environment, will be certainly one of the most areas most open to innovation, most open to disruption. It's very funny. I still remember, you know, when I saw the first video telephone, and you may remember that too, because it was at the same place at BU. We had that in the late 80s, and how revolutionary that was. And now we have that, and we use that every day, day in, day out. I'm here. My family is in Natal, in Brazil, and I talk to them every single, more often than I used to, right? How can AI help? AI can help with everything from enabling online real-time, you know, accessibility, translation, transcription, allowing people to talk in languages that they didn't talk before, to communicate across language barriers. We've seen examples of that in real time multiple times now over the past 2-3 years. Technology that will enable people to find the data that they need more easily, which is still a problem that we have 50 years after the invention of the personal computer. We still keep generating data and we don't know where that data is. Data classification, organization, cataloging continues to be a problem. So I would say that this pandemic is bringing old problems to life, like the old problems of data classification, and it's creating brand new problems, like how do we work together? How do we keep organized across 5 different meetings that you have back to back, and then you have to go back to the beginning of your day and remember what you promised the very first meeting you had, you know, at 7 a.m. And you promised a bunch of things. So I think that every crisis has opportunity in them. It's part of a crisis. It's part of a situation, and this is a very ripe moment in our history, in the history of technology and of business, for transforming entire ecosystems, entire industries. I don't know if every industry is going to survive. I don't know if hotels will exist as they exist today in the future. I don't know if restaurants will exist in the future as they exist today and in the quantity that they exist today, or nightclubs or entertainment. So everywhere you look, wherever there is human relations, wherever there is human contact, it has to be transformed given this pandemic and given the lessons that we are learning now through this pandemic.
No, that's very true. Let me ask both of you a question, which you've alluded to, but I think it's important just to, we talk a lot about US and US-centric. Alexandre gave some examples about opportunity in Brazil. Do you see the differences in what's going to change with, again, 5G, with data, AI, et cetera, in different markets, different regions? Will India or China or Western Europe or the US have different types of innovation, different levels of companies coming, or do you think it'll be somewhat common?
Well, those, let me try to break down this in different geos, right? Let's talk about China first. So China arguably is the most advanced country right now in terms of 5G adoption, volumetry, right? So China has a plan to deploy 600,000 antenna sites supporting 5G by the end of the year. So that's almost, this is 80% of the population, so to speak. So one public number I can disclose about Qualcomm business is that 50% of our activation by May of this year to China was already 5G. So 50% of the phones that were bought by the channel were already 5G compliant. So I see that the China government, of course, China, historically, at least in the last 30 years, the GDP was growing, close to 10%, sometimes more than 10% a year. That was driven mostly by exportation. So this year, of course, is a special year. So the government realized that. So they understood that the GDP growth will come from investments in the country, domestic investments, and they have channelized part of those investments to infrastructure, right? So we talk about all these cool use cases around telemedicine, around agriculture, about retail. The common denominator for all those things is connectivity, right? So if you don't have a reliable underlying connectivity, you don't have those use cases. So so in that aspect, China is arguably ahead of us, right? So US is also deploying, right? To a certain extent, the fact that we don't have many people in the streets helps with the deployment of new technologies in that aspect, right? So the three telcos in US are active. They already have service. They have, without going too technical, but they have chosen, a certain spectrum, a certain frequency that is very interesting from a data speed standpoint. This is called millimeter wave, but it is a little bit more challenging in terms of technical deployment. But they are also, but China and US are effectively the leaders when it comes to that. In Brazil, as you know, we are going to have an auction of 5G by beginning of next year, right? The model for that auction is still being refined. But having said that, three telcos announced as a matter of 2 weeks ago that they are going to introduce 5G in few cities, right? So they are going to use the existing spectrum for 4G to deploy 5G. And that's going to be the first wave of deployment. I think 5G is one of those, very strategic technologies that countries have to have access. I have a belief that, in the coming century, we are going to have like, the digital divide will be given by access to technology. So companies that don't have access to IoT, to 5G, or to AI, they are going to have a hard time to compete in global markets. So I think that in Brazil, we have to play catch up a little bit. We have to accelerate our 5G deployments. I really want to see Brazil exporting technologies to other markets, particularly in the verticals where we are strong. And if I were to say, the impact of, the current status of 5G in Brazil, I think that the fact that we are late help us a little bit in terms of, somehow surfing the economies of scale that you always have in new technologies. So the devices are going to be cheaper. The infrastructure is going to be cheaper, which is good. So that's beneficial. In the same way as we saw a new crop of very interesting startups that surfed 4G, we are going to see the same in 5G. I do have, believe on that. And finally, I think that, what is going to make 5G different in Brazil as compared to other countries is a certain use case specialization around verticals where Brazil is traditionally strong. So agriculture being one example, perhaps, financial services being another example. And I want to believe that logistics can be another example. I think in those three verticals, we do have potential to create companies, startups that really can be very relevant on a global basis.
That's great. And I'm going to apologize for the background noise. I have some construction going on here. Herman, same question to you from your point of view. Any differences between different geographies or countries?
Yes, absolutely. We see many cultural differences, many differences also in their experience with crisis, right? One, especially as I compare Brazil, Latin America, in North America, Brazil, Canada, Mexico, and the other countries in US and Colombia, Peru, Argentina, Chile. One major difference as you travel across these cultures is their experience dealing with crisis, right? Brazil, by its very nature, by the fact that we had hyperinflation and that we had, to survive all of these lack of money, lack of funds, and the dollar going from 3 to 5 to 10, and then coming back to 5, we developed fiscal responsibility, especially the companies, the enterprises, the private sector. We developed an economical a savings culture. Our culture is a savings culture, and we developed very sophisticated financial mechanisms for e-banking, for electronic transactions, and also for automation. And these, in my opinion, would be perhaps, if not the most important, one of the most important technologies, business technologies that will be required going forward. I believe that with the pandemic, the biggest winner is not exactly the telecommunications industry, but the e-commerce or the modality of doing digital business. If you have a business model, whether it's retail or entertainment, or music is entertainment, or food, and you can switch that business model over to a digital medium, you are clearly winning in this new world, because you can talk to as many customers as possible with no physical contact, with no transmission, and you can, of course, gain huge economies of scale. You can also make maximum utilization of idle resources. So one example, Uber. Instead of your car sitting in the garage and you doing nothing, you're driving, you're sharing your car with other people, you're making money, somebody is getting transportation services of much better quality. And the Uber is a huge marketplace where drivers and cars and people who need transportation meet to get transportation. So in my view, the biggest advantage that Brazil has today, when I compare Brazil with the US, Canada, or even Europe, is the fact that Brazil has strong experience in financial technologies, in business technologies, and in dealing with moments of crisis. We should leverage that as one of the main potentials, one of the main capitals, reserves of intellectual capital that we have. And that could be certainly a huge platform for Brazilian innovation and for Brazilian entrepreneurship to bring to the market. And I say that looking at one of the most recent examples of Brazilian success here in the US, which was one XP.com, one of Brazil's newest and most innovative and most disruptive investment firms, launched their IPO in the New York Stock Exchange, right? It was absurdly success, probably one of the best IPOs of last year. And what does XP do? XP, sorry, I'm mixing Portuguese with English here. What does XP do that's different from like TD Ameritrade or from Charles Schwab? Is the experience with crisis, the experience with these financial digital mechanisms and the security, and the experience of working in a country full of hackers where everybody's trying to steal money from you all the time. So Brazil is a very hostile business environment. And if there's something that Charles Darwin taught us, is that organisms, in this case, companies, enterprises, that survive in very hostile environments are stronger and tougher and more resilient than organisms that survived into an easier environment. So I believe that there are significant differences between the cultures. And I believe each one of them has unique talents that they can bring to this new brave world. In my opinion, Brazil's experience with crisis and with banking and e-banking and financial models and financial systems is essential for this new world of e-commerce and digital transactions that will be the new standard. That's the new standard, period, as easy as that, right? I don't think there's any going back. We will not go back to a world where we need physical contact and where we need to travel and where we need to visit a store to buy something. If anything, I see major disruption coming. Why do we need car dealerships at all when Tesla has proven that the no dealership strategy works better for consumers and for the market as a whole? Why do we need powerful servers at all if the cloud companies have proven that cloud computing, sharing computing resources is much better than owning your own servers and your own physical storage in your own data centers? So there are certain technologies and certain areas of business that will be left behind. Just like, in the 1900s, 120 years ago, we shifted from this world where every industry had their own power generation, and now it's unthinkable to have power generation in an industry. You'd say, why would you do that? Just buy electricity from PG&E or from Eletropaulo. You don't need to make your own energy, just buy it. And the same is going to happen with computers, the same is going to happen with financial instruments, the same is going to happen with electronic transactions.
Now that's a fantastic way to describe it. And I'll only flip on one thing, which is, yes, a lot of that crises creates this kind of challenges. I also think it brings out creativity. And I like to think of that as, hey, Brazilians are creative rather than saying they want to steal our money. But that's just me protecting our reputation.
Yeah.
So there's one question. I think there's a couple questions in the chat. So let me get to those before we wrap up. So Alexandre, this I think is for you. The question is, from a business model perspective, do you think the telcos will continue playing a dominant role, or is that going to change with enterprises maybe playing a bigger role with 5G, edge computing and 5G solutions that are more centralized around their own networks?
Yeah, that's a complicated one. The business model for the telcos has been flip side in the last few years, right? So in a certain way, I mean, if I take my nephews as an example, right? So they talk to me, they communicate with me using WhatsApp, right? They send message using Facebook. The only time that they remember, about the telco is when they have to pay the bill. So in a certain way, that business has been disrupted a little bit, right? And the hyperclouds, Amazon, Facebook, Google, of course, they have a major role on that, right? So the telcos are, of course, they are trying to reinvent themselves in a certain way, right? When they look at 5G, the challenge for them is, on one side, there is a huge CapEx investment that has to be done in infrastructure, right? On the other hand, most of them are seeing the revenues a little bit flattened out, right? So with 5G, they are trying to identify new revenue sources, even to justify internally the business case. So it sometimes can be a little bit complex, right? The life for some of the telcos. So we spoke a lot about this idea of bringing the cloud close to the edge, right? So many telcos do have interest on that. I think they recognize that for this to work for them, they have to collaborate with Microsoft, with AWS, Azure, with Google, etc. Because in the end of the day, the hyperclouds are the ones that have the platforms and do have the relationships with the developers. So long story short, yeah, it is a little bit of challenge for them. I think that from a revenue standpoint, consumers take for granted that speeds go up and they don't have to pay more for it, right? I think we as consumers, we take that for granted. On the cost side, on the investment side, yes, there is a big undertake to be done when it comes to deploying the infrastructure for 5G. I think the way they are trying to respond to that is using 5G for new things. So here in US, Verizon has an initiative to provide broadband connectivity to final to end customers, to residences, right? So there is also, as we spoke, initiatives around edge compute. So there are certain applications that will demand very low latency, and the telcos, they kind of control, the real estate close to the antenna side. So they want to monetize that somehow. So there is a fine balance here. There is an equation that is complicated to close. I think some telcos are more advanced than others on that front, right? But this is like the short answer for it. This is almost like a master, like a, it's a master degree thesis, right? I mean, that can be a very long answer, to be honest.
And it's very dynamic, right? Things are changing
very, very dynamic,
much faster than, and even your examples earlier, different adoption timelines, right? It's changing at a much faster pace. There's one more question. It is a little bit more, it's also a bit complicated, but it's the politics of 5G with Huawei, Qualcomm, and other companies. And, will there be some government intervention in that? I don't know if that's something you can comment on, Alexandre?
I can comment in high level. Yeah, I can comment in very high level, right? So without going specifics and without talking specifically about Huawei, in a very high level, right, we can say that the governments, to a certain extent, they want their countries to somehow dominate certain key technologies, right? So Huawei, I didn't want to go specific, but this is super public knowledge, so I can comment. Huawei has difficulty to sell their products in US. As a matter of fact, they cannot sell their products in US, right? And that restriction is also, is also in place in certain countries in Europe, right? That of course creates a competitive pressure on, in the sense that they will have a pressure to insource part of the technology that today they buy from third parties, right? Today, there is no restriction. Actually, Qualcomm and Huawei have a commercial relationship in place, right? But it's very, very obvious that, US, doesn't want the control of certain American companies. It doesn't want certain companies to be controlled by foreign entities, and vice versa, right? So it's becoming increasingly hard for Chinese companies to do M&A in US in this particular area of 5G. There are other areas as well, but 5G is a good example, right? And vice versa, right? It would be very hard for Qualcomm to buy certain IP assets in China for the exact same reasons. I think in the long term, there is interest in China to develop their own silicon ecosystem, right? There are many, many challenges associated with it because there is a whole value chain, a whole supply chain that comes with it, right? Equipment and more essential, products as well. So it's very, very hard to nationalize that. But there is a declared ambition that China has in having those assets, in mainland China, right? So that's also very, very clear. So it's I think there is specific information on our relationship with Huawei that would be hard for me to comment. But what is very visible in terms of geopolitics is that from a macro standpoint, the globalization is gonna go a few steps, is gonna go back a few steps with COVID. I think that there are certain supply chains that both US and China recognize that they don't have control right now. and they consider strategic. So just to give a very brief example, in US, the government, realizes that, we don't control the supply chain for, basic things as masks or oxygen equipment or things like that. So I don't think that the government was comfortable to realize that during a pandemic. So we might see some pushback in terms of globalization in certain supply chains, and of course 5G is part of that as well.
Terrific. So as we wrap up, we just have a couple more minutes. I wanted to ask the same question I asked the first panel, which is for those who are in the audience who perhaps are students or are budding entrepreneurs, any piece of advice, what should they be doing? What should they be studying? What should they be doing as they kind of look to their future? And maybe Herman, you want to go first? Herman?
Sure thing. Learn how to code. I'd say that coding it sounds very funny, but coding is in today's world, a very essential skill. If in the Renaissance, the essential skill was writing or painting or doing commerce, today, the essential skill is coding, because technology is part of everything. Technology is in healthcare, is in education, it's in retail, of course, it's in computing. So learn how to code, even if you're in psychology, even if you're in medicine. Learn how to program at least one language. It's no more difficult than learning how to speak English. It's just the same. In fact, it's probably easier. Learn how to code. It's going to be a skill that you will need for many years. Perhaps not the coding itself, because in the very near future, we won't need to write any programs, but we will need how to code. We will need how to tell a computer, a machine, a robot, an AI system, how to get its job done. My second recommendation as a student, and again, it's in the same area, it's a very tactical recommendation. Do yourself a favor and learn statistics. Learn how to analyze data. Learn, the skills required to read a graphic and to analyze numbers and to analyze a table. These are also essential in today's world, because we can see, just look at the news, the biggest failures of the biggest political leaders in all countries that we see, including Brazil, including the US, is the fact that some of those leaders do not have the capability to understand what the data is telling them. And understanding the data, understanding the numbers, knowing how to read and interpret them is a level of literacy equivalent to learning how to read and write. Learning how to read numbers, learn how to read data, and learning how to code. Those would be, the two tactical. And the non-tactical, more strategic advice I'd give is make sure you embrace diversity, you embrace people who are different than you, and you embrace people who think different than you. Do not think that today's world will be made by only the MIT graduates, or only the ETA graduates, or only the people who come from the top, the best, the most expensive schools. If anything that observing the past has taught us is that the most brilliant and innovative inventors and entrepreneurs and creators of companies do not come from the top schools. So going through a top school is not necessarily a recipe for you to win. It's a good ingredient, but it's not the recipe. The recipe is knowing how to combine all the different learnings, all the different experiences, all the different aspects and points of view. And one way to translate that is embracing diversity in thinking, diversity in ideas, and read ideas and news and watch news from people who you disagree completely with. If you're a right person, try to understand how the left thinks. If you're a left person, try to understand how the right, the Democrats think. Sorry, the conservatives think. Embrace diversity. Try to have a broad view. Try to have, not a uniform view. not a just one-way view, because the world today it requires democracy and requires embracing different viewpoints.
That's great. Terrific. Sean, we only have 1 minute. Can I ask you to maybe wrap it up?
Yeah, I will do that very quickly. If I were to give an advice, I mean, this crisis has been very symmetric in terms of how affected countries. Every single country was affected in the same way, but was very asymmetric in terms of economy, right? So technology companies are clearly the winners. So right now, technology is like 40% of, market cap of the largest 500 companies in US. So if I were to give an advice, if I were to give an advice for someone that is starting now, I would, perhaps try to become an expert in digital transformation, right? Try to become an expert in technology and use that knowledge perhaps to transform, the business of traditional companies that have good brands, have good reputation in the market, good customers, but are not tech savvy, right? I think there is a huge space for that. There is a huge, even investment thesis to be, deployed around this particular team.
Terrific. With that, it is exactly 3 o'clock Pacific. Thank you both. Thank you to all of the panelists. And I'll turn it back to Margarise.
Thank you so much. I learned so much from you today. Thank you, Herman. Thank you, Alexandre. And thank you, Avanish, for moderating this discussion. So good to have you.
Thank you all. Yeah, thank you, Avanish.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Avanish. Thank you, Margarise.
Obrigado.
Thank you, everybody that joined us both from Zoom and from Facebook. This conversation and the other previous conversation within our conference will be available at YouTube. Check it out by tomorrow. It's going to be available. Also, I want to let you know that we have a few more events coming to wrap up our conference, annual conference 2020. Next week, August 13, we are having leaders of the accelerators in Brazil and the US. They will be talking about scaling through crisis. They will be tell us how they are helping startups emerge stronger from the pandemic. Then on August 20, we'll have leaders from both regions discussing sustainability and the future of food. That's all coming up. Muito obrigada.
Obrigado. Tchau, tchau, pessoal.
Tchau, parabéns. Obrigado.